Dear congregants and friends, beloved colleagues all, whence we come, we have often come here together into this meeting house of memory and hope, into the grace-filled absence of one who before us went and is now gone. Sometimes pastor of this church, the Reverend Kenneth Sawyer, esteemed colleague and cherished friend. Years hence, I tell my dear colleagues here gathered, colleagues will gather as we do now, when thee or me are no more with us. And though we may feel ourselves less worthy, they too will celebrate and honor what was our unique place in the unbroken line. Let us not then or here fuss or quibble, not about theology or about reasons, refutations of the holy, or about this or that irrefutable revelation of the divine, about the syntax or exegetes of truth texts, or about whither go souls, worthy or not. Never did Ken quibble. He embodied grace, and in the fullness of the world he benedicted and blessed, often with these words by our late colleague Angus MacLean. We sometimes walk the woods and stride the hills, when stones and grasses and the birds of the air are just things that ask no questions, tease no sense of wonder from us, nor find any warm response in us. But there are times when we rise to meet the morning as though we had never seen a sunrise, and in a sense, it may turn out we have not. There are invitations in the air and all about us, and we accept them exultantly. We listen to the winds turning up the leaves for their day's performance. The hills and the headlands seem to shout us welcome, and meandering past lure our feet where they will. And we are never disappointed. Beloved colleague, we give praise to thee. Beloved colleagues all.
We light this chalice in honor of the light of the Reverend Ken Sawyer brought into many people's lives throughout his ministry. Our reading for this chalice lighting is adapted from words by Elizabeth M. Strong. Reverently, I offer this symbol of our hope and high intent. Reverently, I bequeath this flame to you. This is the light that is lit for everyone who comes into the world. Bear this light to others one by one. Let the flame go from life to life till all are lit with its warmth. Tell that this is the light that is lit for everyone who comes into and who leaves the world. Let this flame be an everlasting reminder of the man who answered a call to bring light into people's lives, to comfort them, to challenge them, to minister, and to mentor them.
Let us join in singing that which we have sung on so many occasions such as this, rank by rank.
Please be seated. I am the Reverend Dr. Stephanie May, minister here at First Parish in Wayland. And I walked alone down the aisle. But what I remembered was, for my installation, I walked shoulder to shoulder with Ken. And today we are here to honor the life and ministry of the Reverend Kenneth Sawyer. Ordained in 1970, Ken first served in Holton, Maine, before beginning here in 1974. Retiring after 38 years, Ken then became Minister Emeritus until his death last spring. Today we will hear much about Ken's ministry over his more than 50 decades of service in this odd profession, as he once described it. While these many years took him across this state, this country, and into other nations, for most of his ministry, First Parish in Wayland is the place to which he returned again and again. Even after his retirement and conscientious 2-year absence during the interim, Ken happily returned to sit there in the back of the sanctuary in a pew that I began to think of as his. Sometimes he shared the pew with one of his daughters, Amy or Becca, and sometimes the whole family sat together for a holiday or special occasion. Even when the congregation moved online during the pandemic, Ken continued to stay connected by logging in online, often on Facebook, actually. When I became Ken's successor in 2014, colleagues with more experience wished me good luck, as following such a long-time minister had a reputation for bringing challenges. And yet Ken was far from a meddlesome retired colleague. Rather, Ken's continued care for the congregation simply transformed into a new role and relationship with the congregation and with me. To me, Ken became a mentor and a resource that enabled me to better serve the congregation and the people who remain dear to him. In this way, Ken's designation as Minister Emeritus was not merely a formal title. It was another kind of ministry. We talked regularly, meeting nearly every month for breakfast or lunch. Early in my ministry, I began a practice of calling him first when someone in the congregation had died. It felt right to me that he learned the news from me rather than the general notice to the congregation. But then when he died, there was no one to call. And it was in that moment I began to feel the profundity of his absence. His quiet, persistent presence of care and curiosity had always been there, woven into my own ministry. For his presence as Minister Emeritus, I am deeply grateful, even as I grieve that he is no longer here in his pew. I know I am not alone in feeling this tension of gratitude and loss. In this time together this afternoon, let us honor both of these feelings. As we gather in this historic meeting house that Ken loved, may we hear remembrances of his ministry, listen to some of his favorite music, and sit with our own memories and emotions. Let us feel what we feel, not afraid of our laughter or our tears. Let us begin.
For 38 years, First Parish in Wayland was Ken Sawyer's parish ministry home, and we were his congregation. That's a remarkable thing. For a very long time, through all sorts of change in the world, Ken drew in and centered an evolving array of people into voluntary and sustained community with one another. Sunday services with Ken were often an adventure because of the enormous variety of topics he found interesting. He never seemed to run short of ideas that piqued his wonderment or curiosity. His sheer delight as he shared his thoughts with us, energized and inspired, wiping the sweat from his forehead, giving a characteristic little laugh when he knew he'd just revealed something surprising, or slipping in a sentence that he knew would make us laugh. Ken, earnest and enthusiastic in his pulpit, was an inspiration who drew so many people back week after week and year after year. And that long association matured through thought-provoking Sunday services, developed a congregational identity that was powerful and sustaining. Sometimes he'd begin a sermon and you might think, where's he going with this? But then the pieces would begin to fall into place, a reading here, a quotation there, all linked into a message that left you aware that your understanding of the world and its ways had been expanded. In the end, you were left wanting to carry that insight with you out the doors and into your life. It was easy to know how many different people Ken inspired on Sunday because of the length of time it took to leave the sanctuary when the service was over. Almost everyone had a thought they wanted to share with him before they departed. We in Ken's congregation knew well that Ken out of the pulpit could seem a very different sort of person, a self-effacing man of few words. But not having words never prevented Ken from showing up. He knew that simply being present for times of strong emotion or meaning could be a powerful balm for the spirit. His quiet company acknowledged the implications of life changes without imposing an outside interpretation on the occasion. Another aspect of Ken's quietude was that he was using his time to listen. It wasn't uncommon to share a piece of news or an idea with Ken to be met with only a nod or, Many times, though, there'd be a follow-up later, a note or a phone call that made it clear he had both heard and reflected upon an earlier exchange. These thoughtful responses were so important to helping others feel recognized and valued for who and what they were, and as members of the community. And as much as Ken enjoyed preaching, he understood the value of hearing other perspectives in addition to his own. As a congregation, we were fortunate that Ken's nature was such that he continually introduced additional voices into our parish life. He often shared prayers or readings written by other ministers, and for much of his career in Wayland, Ken encouraged the congregation to support intern ministers who were valued additions. Ken also welcomed shared ministry when Kimmy Regal and later Aaron Splain were called by the congregation to augment and enrich our spiritual and congregational lives. Ken's sermons illuminated new areas of intellectual reflection aimed at finding meaning in the universe. He inspired us by the ways he illustrated and modeled the belief that expanded understanding can lead to deeper acceptance and appreciation of others. A few years ago, we had a chance to make a small booklet of a few of the stories that Ken wrote to share with the children in our congregation and with the other children in his life. And those stories, simple as they are precious because I believe their message encapsulates the underpinning of Ken Sawyer's ministry at First Parish. So I'll close with a paraphrase of the ending from one of those stories. But all in all, given how different people are, the wonderful thing was, every week we got together to remember the good things in life.
It's an honor for me, as one of Ken's 18 interns, to share some remembrances of him in the role as intern supervisor. In correspondence with several of Ken's other interns, it became clear that our memories of that time with Ken had a great deal in common. My first day as an intern here, and that of many of the other interns, started with a tour of the town and a little sporty black convertible driven by Ken. I must admit, other than worrying about Ken's driving, my thoughts at the moment were on whether this was really a good mentor-mentee match. But something happened in that sporty little car. His love of ministry and his love of helping to create ministers really revealed itself. Well, I never learned the geography of Wayland very well. In fact, the intern committee here gave me a compass as a joke gift because I got lost so often. But learning the town was really not the purpose of the Miata ride. It was a bonding experience in which Ken's sincerity and commitment came through and created the foundation of a relationship of trust and respect. I remember the breakfast at the local mom and pop restaurant that followed the ride, and that became a regular monthly event where Ken included his intern in a breakfast meeting with the board president. For many of us, this practice was a revelation of ministerial leadership and lay leadership staying on the same page and working together within our often difficult governing structure. Those breakfasts with the president are a tradition that many of us continue to do to this day, even in Mexico. We all marveled at the subtle ways that we learned about congregational polity and politics from Ken. Robin Zucker reminded me how Ken doodled all through board meetings and said very little. When I saw that at first, it surprised me. Was he really disinterested? Then I began to hear the ideas that Ken had discussed with the board president at that breakfast or other meetings with lay leaders during the week or two before the board meeting come forth. He planted the seeds, shared his position, suggested a direction long before the meeting. His work was done before the meeting started. Ken didn't teach ministry by lecturing to you. He taught by example and by asking the right questions. He listened more than he spoke, sometimes just offering, as Susie mentioned, an affirming nod or a questioning raised eyebrow. Ken allowed you to learn by doing, to live into the role of the minister working alongside him as part of a team. Many of us remember so well making and serving soup to members of this congregation with him. Now, I must admit, when I first heard that we were doing a soup kitchen in affluent Wayland, I thought, really? But those monthly lunches where the ministers made the soup not only provided pastoral care and built beloved community, they also conveyed a clear and profound message about humility and service in our profession. Many of us have continued the soup practice in the congregations we've served. Ken would bring us with him when he would meet with a family at a time of loss. We just watched as he brought comfort and support and skillfully just helped people to tell you about the deceased person as well as their beliefs and their spiritual needs. The service he shaped fit them perfectly, yet always included many of Ken's tried and true words for such occasions. Diane Tykert reminded me that probably every one of us has stolen some of those words from his wedding services or memorial services, and many of his practices as well. A few years ago, I told him that I still used what I thought were some beautiful words from his Christmas Eve service. His reply, "Oh, I stopped using them years ago." Many of us copied his practice of inviting recent high school grads coming home from college to usher at the Christmas Eve service. We all remember the fun and slightly mischievous Ken, too. Steve Landell remembers Ken enjoying role-playing the lousy pastoral care provider at a Mass Bay District training held right here in this room. Ken, I think, rather enjoyed allowing himself to be the brunt of the joke. I was preaching here in this pulpit on April Fool's Day, and Ken and I concocted a secret scheme for the occasion. I would do the opening words, and he would light the chalice. But he would keep fumbling, unable to get it lit. And I would really scold him for the pulpit for being such a klutz. We played it to the hilt, and the congregation gasped as their intern yelled at their beloved minister until I said the words, "April Fools." Ken was totally devoted to making the internship experience a learning experience and not an opportunity for cheap ministerial labor. But occasionally, Ken might just see an opportunity to get an intern to do something that maybe he really didn't want to do. I couldn't believe it that he asked me to preach on Easter. That would never have happened in my home church. Was that some great compliment? Well, truth be told, Ken just did not want to engage that Easter story again and thought that my Christian-leaning theology could get him off the hook. You'll note something about this cisgender, straight, white male supervisor of ours. Not many of his interns fit that profile. Most, overwhelmingly, are women, and some of us, whether out at the time or not, are gay. Many of us had not received the encouragement and support in pursuing our calling that some of our straight, white male peers did. In the words of Deborah Pope Lance, Ken offered us respect and rigorous advocacy, showing himself to be a person of enormous integrity, worthy of trust and great respect, and capable of extending saving grace to all. Steve Landell put it this way: Ken filled us with warm appreciation of our own gifts. All of his interns would agree, our ministries have been better ministries because of Ken. So Ken certainly lives on in the work that this minister did with those interns and that those interns do, and even maybe to the next generation. For the interns of the interns, his influence helps to shape. So I think for Ken, that's a comfortable kind of immortality.
Ken would often start memorial services with a poem by John Holmes, which laments that death this year has taken men, whose kind we may not see again. Pride and skill and friendliness, fervor, wisdom and delight are shining still, but shining less, and clouded to the common sight. Time will show them clear again. Time will give us other men with names to write in burning gold when they are great and we are old. But these were royal-hearted, rare. Memory keeps in loving care deeds they did and tales they told, but living men are hard to spare. How was Ken as a staff colleague? He was royal-hearted, rare. And we all know that he would cringe at the thought that being so might imply that he was perfect, because he was not. For instance, now 25 years into this ministry thing, if there is anything that I might know about church administration, I did not learn it from Ken Sawyer. The breadth of Ken's ministry is stunning. It is so fitting and lovely to be together to celebrate all that he meant to so many generations of parishioners, religious professionals, and ministers alike. What I can guarantee you is that woven through all the remembrances, and we've heard a little bit so far, but woven through all the remembrances will be several similar threads, because Ken was Ken in all settings. One of the many phrases that he wrote that I use to this day was from a sermon he gave about the importance of communities of faith like this one, that he loved so well. That when done well, but not perfectly, but with all the earnestness of us humans doing our best, communities of faith can be places where, as he said, we can be who we are without disguise. Ken was who he was without disguise. He was kind and curious and present. He had a keen and at times devilish sense of humor. He was thoughtful and self-deprecating. And he was brilliant. God, he was brilliant. He was also fearless in the pulpit. He could comfort wounds that felt so deep that they might not ever heal enough to carry on. He could break down the most complex concept into a relatable nugget on which one might find oneself ruminating for some time beyond, and he met issues head on with clarity and difficult truths. Now, his fearlessness in the pulpit became legendary one Sunday morning. I was, I think, sitting down there when, with his usual rhetorical ease, I think he was talking about nature. Does that sound right? A Ken Sawyer sermon about nature, maybe? When out of nowhere and without hesitation, he used the word fecundity in a sentence and then kept going as if he had no concern about how badly that could have gone for him. I practiced that word for a week before today. But he kept going as if it was nothing. I started working with Ken as one of his many interns back when I didn't know anything. A few years later, I came back to First Parish as the second minister when I knew even less. Yet one of the gifts of working with Ken was his inherently collaborative nature. It didn't matter that there was a gulf of experience between us. He made room to blend our ideas and our experiences, our thoughts throughout the myriad moments in the life of our work together. But it did not mean that the blending was always seamless. Because there were times when in matters large or small, we disagreed on what the issue of the day was or how to proceed. Sometimes he would be swayed by my brilliance. Other times he would make the wrong decision. And either way, we knew that we could have those moments and carry on united because of who he was. He made sure that there was room at the table for more than just his worldview, his experience, and his comfort. I may not have learned a great deal from Ken about church administration, yet absolutely everything I know about ministry is, in almost every measure, because of him. How was Ken Sawyer as a staff colleague? He was royal-hearted and rare.
The beginning is now, and will always be. You say you lost your chance, and fate brought you defeat, but that means nothing. You look so sad. You've been listening to those who say you missed your chance. There's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard another train. You may feel you're done, but there's no such thing. Though you're standing on your own, your own breath is king. The beginning is now. Don't turn around, for regrets or bad mistakes will only drain you. There's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard another train. We crawl in the dark sometimes and we think too much. Then we fill our heads with the craziest things that only break our hearts. I know what you've seen, what this earth can do when it's dragging down another load. Blink, who are we use? There's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard another train. I know it's hard when you feel confused. We can crown ourselves with it all till we feel we cannot move. Ever building walls that don't exist. Imagination plays the worst there's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard, there's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard, there's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard, there's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard, there's another train. There always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard another train.
I'm Sarah Lammert. I currently serve as the co-director of Ministries and Faith Development at our Unitarian Universalist Association. And I've had the privilege of spending over 20 years in a study group that Ken helped to found, the Cedar Hill Study Group, which meets twice a year, and many of my fellow Cedar Hillians are here. It's really nice to see all of you. The Ken I knew was always in blue jeans. He was relaxed, he was happy to be with colleagues, eager to share his reflections, to listen intently to others, to tell stories, and to laugh together. When I first met Ken, it was in about the year 2000. I was a relatively new young adult minister in a very modest startup congregation in Ogden, Utah, and he seemed very well established and very important. It might have been easy to feel intimidated by Ken's intellect and his status in our ministry, except that he was, well, Ken. Ken never put on airs. He was unfailingly generous, kind, and encouraging to younger and newer colleagues. I asked my colleagues in the Cedar Hill Study Group to share remembrances of Ken. Paige Getty wrote, "I wish I had a vivid, specific anecdote to share, but I don't. Rather, I'm simply and profoundly grateful for the ways that Ken, as a Harvard Divinity School professor, I was his student sometime between 1996 and 1999, and a senior colleague in Cedar Hill and in our UU Ministers Association leadership, was always kind, generous, and gentle, even in times of distress or disagreement. He offered me the respect of a colleague, even when I was green and naive, and from my earliest days as his student, his confidence in my ministry buoyed me." Nathan Dietering had this to share. "The most important thing I can say about Ken was simply how fantastic a colleague he was when I first arrived here in Sherburne back in 2003, so young and green and completely overwhelmed. In his beautifully quiet, present without being persistent way, he reached out to me to simply check in on those early years, letting me know that parish work wasn't just possible, but also a pretty wonderful way to spend a vacation. I remember a particular time later in my ministry when I was asked to interview at other congregations, and I asked Ken if he could meet with me because I was curious how and why he decided to stay put in Wayland for so long. His answer, which I'll never forget, was how he sought to have many different ministries over the arc of his ministry, allowing him to be at once rooted in the same place, space, and people, but also branching out in new directions as he felt called. To stretch the metaphor probably too far, Ken, in his own way, gave me shade as a new minister, showing me how qualities like permanence and change don't have to mean changing jobs. I really wonder whether I'd still be in Sherburne now in my 20th year if I hadn't had him as a model. Daniel Gregoire told me a story of Ken going out of his way to welcome him as a colleague when he joined Cedar Hill after coming to serve the Grafton and Upton congregation. I have a fond memory, he said, of his taking me to the UU Urban Ministry Center in Roxbury and showing me the old meeting house and allowing me to raid the old minister's study for antiquarian books. My favorite things, old books and old buildings. I felt more deeply connected to our tradition, having had his tour of the place. He was so kind and generous with his time, and genuinely excited to see that familiar place again through my excitement. Mark Harris, now retired after serving the Milton and later the Watertown congregations, and now living in Maine and here, has shared some remembrances of Ken as well. Ken was aware of the importance of our history, he writes. We had many conversations about this, as he had long ago written a sermon series on all of his predecessors here in Wayland. I quickly replicated that idea in Milton. One of Ken's predecessors had also served the church in New Salem, my hometown. In a Cedar Hill conversation, Ken agreed to show me Joel Foster's grave in Wayland's North Cemetery. Ken quickly pointed out where Lydia Maria Child was interred, but we had a more difficult time finding Foster. It was about 100 degrees that day, but Ken persevered. Up and down the rows of granite we ambled, Ken and I and my wife, Andrea, who recalls that every time she filled the pulpit in Wayland, a lovely handwritten thank you note would appear in the mail by the following Wednesday. He had a way of making her feel valued. And on this day, out grave hunting, he had made a promise and he was not going to renege. After a half an hour of sweating profusely, we found Foster etched in stone. Our reward was lunch at one of Ken's favorite places, the Chateau. When I discovered sometime later that I had prostate cancer, Ken was the first person I called for advice and support. He was a history lover, a promise keeper, a consummate note card sender, and a caring friend and colleague. Cheryl M. Walker, now the interim minister of the Germantown, Pennsylvania congregation, remembers how supportive Ken was when she became the president of the UU Ministers Association. For her and for me, Ken was experienced in 1,000 tiny moments, which altogether left the impression of a loving, curious, friendly, knowledgeable, sometimes irreverent, and always engaged and engaging man. He was our colleague and he was our friend. We love and miss you, Ken.
When I was a new parishioner here, back in the 70s, one Sunday morning, a longtime member said to me, "You know, this is the best show in town." And by then, having heard about a year of Ken's sermons, I said to him, "You know what? You're right." What an extraordinary preacher Ken was. Not too long after that brief conversation, my mother came to live with us unexpectedly, and it was hard. It was really hard. So one day I made an appointment to come down and talk with Ken. He listened empathetically, and when I finished my litany of the challenges that this new living situation had brought, he said to me, "Well, you might consider short-sheeting her bed." He did. And then 2 months later, she had broken her hip, And he showed up one Saturday morning at her bedside at Emerson Hospital just to see how she was. Ken was a wonderful minister. Something some of you may not know about Ken is that for a time, decades ago, he had a motorcycle. And not a wimpy Vespa, it was a real Harley-Davidson kind of motorcycle. And he would roar up that driveway, well, not on Sundays, but late weekday afternoons in jeans and his boots and leather jacket and helmet, and well, it was like Easy Rider had come into Wayland. To know Ken was to know how much he loved ministry. He loved all of it. He loved being a minister. He loved Unitarian Universalism. He loved denominational work. But most of all, he loved this church. And he loved this congregation. And how this congregation loved him back. And then after 38 years here, and a serious cancer diagnosis, he retired. And retirement came sooner than he had hoped, but he thought it was best for his health and best for his family and best for the church. And then, within maybe a year or two, several of us in the area were also retiring. And so 7 years ago, we formed what we called a retirement group. There were 8 of us, and we met every month. We met for support, to talk about what we missed and didn't miss about ministry. We talked about changes in our lives, in our health, and the frustrations that aging brings. So while we met for camaraderie, we really met just because we like being together. In these past 7 years, Ken was the only one of us who never missed a meeting. He came when he could no longer drive. He came when he could hardly walk. He came until he couldn't come anymore. Our group is still meeting, but how we miss him. It's said that some people come into our lives and leave, and others come into our lives and stay, leaving footprints on our hearts. The footprints remain. I like to think of Ken now, his spirit somewhere in the universe, riding a motorcycle and gardening and reading, and feeling a deep sense of satisfaction with a life well lived and work well done.
Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist, no question about it. But let's unpack what that really means. Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist, no question about it. But let's unpack what that really means. Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist, no question. Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist. But let's unpack what that really means. But let's unpack what that really means and what it meant to him. Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist. For Ken Sawyer was loyal to values. Let's unpack what that really means. But let's unpack what that really means and what it meant to him. Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist. And learned as a child from his parents who were. Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist, no question about it. But let's unpack what that really means and what it meant to him as a child from his parents. To begin with, I think for Ken Sawyer was loyal to values he saw and no question as a child from his parents. But let's unpack what that really means and what it meant to him as a child from his parents. To begin with, I think Yeah, you want me to try to do this live? Can you hear me? I'm not as elegantly dressed, but that would be okay with Ken. So, as you know, Ken Sawyer was an institutionalist, no question about it. But let's unpack what that really means and what it meant to him. To begin with, I think for Ken, it meant he was loyal to values he saw and learned as a child from his parents, who were devoted Unitarians.
So sorry, I'm going to have to stop you. We're getting an echo in the sanctuary.
He was loyal to values he saw and learned.
Yeah. So my tech guy quit 2 weeks ago. We thought we had it covered.
So does Jane has the text handy?
So Jane's going to read it.
You go, Jane.
Okay, thank you.
So does Jane has the text handy? You go, Jane.
How many texts do you have? And Wayne goes on. To begin with, I think for Ken, it meant he was loyal to values he saw and learned as a child from his parents, who were devoted Unitarians. Growing up in our faith, Ken saw his father go off to chair the evening meetings of the church board in 2 different congregations in New Jersey. Institutional commitment ran in Ken's blood. Young ministers and new ministers in a district or chapter often get asked quickly to take on some UUA or UUMA role. And we say yes, sometimes because we're flattered or because we don't want to offend. And some people say yes out of a sense of duty. That's another aspect of being an institutionalist. Duty is a word that means something to you. You recognize that your life and your congregation is part of a larger whole without which the context that gives your life some of its meaning would not exist. In every denominational leadership role he accepted, he said yes because he was asked by someone he respected and whose judgment about his capacities he trusted. That's another aspect of being an institutionalist. You recognize that the denomination is not a bureaucracy in Boston, it is people, most of whom are also institutionalists, who become your friends. The other common characteristic in all Ken's leadership roles within the UUA and the UUMA is that they were all connected to the commitment he had made to the primary and essential institution where his lineage and loyalty and duty was practiced, the parish. This focus of Ken's ministry is being invoked often today, but I think it's important for me to say this here because some people who seek out denominational leadership roles do so because they are restless in the routines of the parish and need a different sphere of leadership to maintain their enthusiasm. But not so much for Ken. Many times his denominational roles were an imposition on his demanding and beloved parish duties. Many of them involved meetings in Boston and winter commutes on the Mass Pike rather than enjoyable junkets to gatherings in warm climates. There were few perks. He probably didn't even ask for reimbursement for the tolls. It's emblematic that Ken's first and longest commitment to denominational service began with a request from a parishioner, Margaret Woodard, who asked Ken to take a seat on the board of the Benevolent Fraternity of Unitarian Universalist Churches. Ken said yes, of course. Over 28 years of service, he engaged with all the changes involved in what we used to call the Ben Frat, becoming the UU Urban Ministry. Ken's dedication to his parish roles and his service to his UU Ministers Association chapter and UUA district drew him to the attention of the UUA board, who asked Ken to serve on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. He was 40 years old at the time, already recognized by his colleagues as a teacher and exemplar of the skills of parish ministry. The randomness of turnover on the MFC meant that within 2 years of beginning his service, Ken was a senior minister of the committee. He would serve 7 years in all, alongside many respected and well-remembered colleagues, people whose friendship he prized and whose work together would swell him with pride. Just a little swell, mind you, because Ken was not one to wear his emotions on his sleeve, nor brag of his accomplishments. Little did he know when he began his service on the MFC that the committee would be entering its most challenging years, when issues of sexual abuse and ministerial accountability would first come to the fore, when prejudices against fellowshipping queer ministers were still dominant and needed to be challenged, and when community ministers aggressively sought recognition and respect from their parish colleagues. The courageous disciplinary decisions the MFC had to make during those years took a lot out of Ken. Some ministers were shocked when senior and popular colleagues had their fellowships removed for conduct unbecoming. In his Odyssey, Ken alluded to his own emotional turmoil during this time in one typically low-key sentence. He said, "I don't much like being hated and feeling isolated, maybe especially for doing the right thing." The emotions Ken felt during those years had nothing to do with anxiety about his personal reputation. They were emotions of embarrassment and disappointment and concern for our faith and our ministry. It was personally offensive to Ken that a colleague in fellowship could abuse the trust placed in a minister for personal satisfaction. It was inconceivable that a colleague within our covenant could lie to protect himself. It was threatening to the future of the faith he loved that colleagues could challenge process of accountability under a banner of defending individual freedom or moral relativism. Ken was no prude, far from it, but he believed that when you made a promise, you kept it. And when you were in covenant, you took it deeply and seriously. A few years following the conclusion of his MFC service, he was an obvious and excellent nominee by his colleagues to become president of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. Ken's service as president from 2005 to 2008 focused on the UUMA's guidelines, which were in need of a major review. He was also an important contributor to a project he would not see finished during his service, a decade-long study of the core competencies we could identify within all the identities of ministerial practice. There is one final role in Ken's denominational service I want to hold up as an example of his institutional devotion and duty. For several years, he chaired the UUA Pamphlet Commission. Nobody aspires to this job, and nobody gets remembered for it. But I think about what this job really entails. You think hard about what brand new perspective Unitarian Universalists walking into a congregation for the first time might best read within a handful of carefully written paragraphs that speak to who we are as a faith and how we might speak to the needs, identities, concerns, and questions of the anonymous person picking up the pamphlets. Pamphlets are important. Ken knew that. So my final word about Ken Sawyer and how he loyally fulfilled his duty to his denomination and his colleagues is this. I wish he could be reborn as a pamphlet in every one of our congregations. Because in that pamphlet, we would be confident we would find the very best that Unitarian Universalism has to offer for a life of meaning, purpose, and service. Thus ends the Wayne Arneson reading. Thank you so much, Wayne. Jane Jepko writes, here's the thing about Ken. One more thing anyway. By my calculation, Ken Sawyer listened to more Unitarian Universalist sermons than anyone in the known universe. For starters, nearly 8 years listening to candidates for our ministry as they preached their sermons. Tentative preaching, or inspiring, quavering, fabulous, inaudible, hilarious. Ken heard them all, always the encouraging presence. And then his 13 years teaching at Harvard Divinity School, where because we taught preaching as a team, sometimes I could notice his eyes sparkle at the perfect illustration, or struggle to stay awake when sermons went long, or blink in disbelief when a student pushed the boundaries of common decency. But he remained a minister no matter what, patiently finding just the right critique, even as his hair stood on end, or reveling in a student's natural or hard-won success. He loved to teach preaching. What does he think he was teaching there in the classroom? In his 1984 collection of sermons, Perspectives, he wrote, "We want to call forth a depth of appreciation for the wonders of life, and a renewed aspiration to lives more aligned with the holy things of life, more loving, more supportive, less distracted, more firmly grounded. I'm here to tell you about Ken's teaching. So on we go, teaching intensive classes at our theological schools in Chicago and Berkeley. Ken at the ready, sermon after sermon coming at us, the bold, the brilliant, the bombastic, the pointless, the astounding, the endless. Ken always finding a positive comment, sometimes miraculously, sometimes joyously, easily. We went on to hear ministers' sermons and workshops in Indianapolis, sermons in New Mexico, sermons in Washington State, in New York, Washington, D.C., Delaware, Maine. Ken, emblematic of his ministry, always projecting acceptance and nurture and care. A number of you here and attending virtually know this. You experienced Ken's teaching personally. The years went by and the decades, and still Ken loved to teach preaching. What grounded his teaching during those years? He once wrote, "I believe that human life is a meaningless biological happenstance and that there is no ultimate point to human existence. But there is meaning and purpose we may devise for ourselves to aid, amuse, support, enliven, nurture, delight, and comfort in spite of the fact that we are all destined to die." Ken didn't surround himself with what he considered theological fluff. We went on to train Unitarian Universalist ministers in Brussels and England and the tribal lands of the Northeast India, where even after taking a huge bite of lard, mistaking it for mashed potatoes, even after we politely visited what turned out to be a very long and very dark cave, pushing through it Winnie the Pooh style, even after he actually screamed during a terrifying drive along the narrow mountain roads of the Kazi Hills, Ken listened, oh so calmly and happily, to hours of preaching. Can't you just see him in a remote church that was truly freezing, by then wearing a traditional woolen Kazi shawl, listening day after day to sermons preached not in English, but in the Kazi language. And there he sat, apparently engaged. So kind, so tender, so wise. I can vouch not only for the attentive expression on Ken's face during the impenetrable to us Kazi sermons, but also for the care he took with every single preacher during all those years, no matter what the country, state, school, or ministers group. He was ever the dedicated professional, the good-humored yet businesslike colleague, the old-fashioned gentleman. Yes, Ken loved to teach preaching. Along the way, after years of frustration by the lack of a Unitarian Universalist textbook, Ken and I turned our lectures into just such a text, which is still in use. In writing about sermon preparation, Ken said, "Ministers may fret about whether or not the substitute organist will really appear. They may worry that nobody will show up to hear a wonderful sermon, or conversely, that a whole lot of people will show up and hear a terrible sermon, or that the service will run way too long or too short. The point is, it's the people who are important. The people and their religious lives. If you can love them enough to know them, then you are a long way towards successful preaching." Can you tell that Ken himself was a wonderful preacher, delivering over 40 years' worth of weekly sermons? We wrote 3 children's books, different ones from the one that Susie mentioned. One about how you can believe in God or not, one about right and wrong, and one about death. He was so good at bringing our liberal theology down to earth, and he loved to tell stories for children, as this congregation knows. He wrote the following for kids about death. He said, all living things have a beginning and an end, and in between is living. Unitarian Universalists believe that how people live during their lifetime is what counts. Yep, that's Ken. By now, this afternoon, thanks to our speakers and your own memories, you've been reminded that Ken was a professional minister through and through. He had it all: the good cheer, persistence, deep and tender compassion, smarts, and the inner quiet that excellence in ministry required. He loved the ministry. He wrote, I think ministry is a gift, to be allowed to love Unitarian Universalism, to love our liberal values, and to love everyone. It's not always easy, but it's a gift, and I couldn't be more grateful for having had it. He loved the ministry, and he loved you. We'll all be a long time missing Ken.
As Jane just quoted, Ken once wrote, all living things have a beginning and an end. Yes, and sometimes living things leave behind seeds, enabling the impact of one life to extend far beyond their death. Today's remembrances testify to the thousands of seeds Ken's life planted in people and in institutions. As I understand it, as I've heard, and I have to say that a new minister mistake I made was I didn't listen carefully enough on how important this ritual was to this congregation. That Ken, at the end of the growing season, would bring a dried marigold blossoms into the service. He would then brandish a bowl of seeds and share his intention to plant them in the spring, watering them with the communal water of Water Sunday. How wondrous, he would exclaim, that these dry little seeds would somehow make it through the cold, snowy days of winter to emerge with new life in the spring. By watering the seeds with the communal water, he underscored how we are all part of the renewing circles of life and death. As we have heard, Ken's ministry watered life into so many of us. Even as we mourn his death, we know that he planted seeds with his living. He lives on in his family, in his students and interns, and his friends and colleagues, and in the institutions he helped to shape. As a testament to his living impact among and upon us, I invite you to take a packet of marigold seeds with you from one of the baskets as you leave today. And if you're online and want one, just drop an email to me or to the church, and we'll make sure and get one in the mail to you. Please plant them in spring and celebrate how life returns again and again, even after seasons of winter and grief. So may we remember Ken and the lessons he gave us to relish the wonder of life. Amen. I invite you to please rise now in body or in spirit to join in singing the great hymn, For All the Saints. Our benediction today are words from George Beauchamp. I am told that they are words Ken used multiple times as a benediction. And today I share them as a charge to us all from Ken. The most necessary of faiths is faith in ourselves. Not faith that we will be wise, for we are often foolish, but faith that we, at our best, are capable of wisdom and that we can be taught to be wiser than we are. Not faith that we will be good, for we are sometimes wicked, but faith that we can be inspired to greater goodness and compassion. Not faith that we will always be strong or brave, for the best of us are often weak, but faith that we are capable of strength and that through faith in all our potentialities comes greater firmness. Not faith that we are wise or good or brave or strong, but that we are capable of becoming wise enough, brave enough, and strong enough to make a habitable world together. May it be so, and amen.
Everybody's wondering what and where they all come from. Everybody's worried about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say when you're gone forever, and some say you're gonna come back. Some say you rest in the arms of the Savior if the sinful ways you lack. Some say that you're coming back in a garden full of carrots and little sweet peas. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Everybody's wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody's worried about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say I'm going to a place called glory, and I ain't saying that in fact. But I've heard I'm on the road to purgatory, and I don't like the sound of that. Well, I believe love lives our life accordingly, but I choose to let the mystery be.